I've helped over 10,000 developers prepare for technical coding interviews, and in this video, I'm going to cut through all the bullshit and explain to you what actually works and how you can prepare effectively. Now, just to set the credibility here, I've been on YouTube now for nearly 8 years. I have legitimately worked with thousands of developers one-on-one doing things like interview prep, but I've also provided tons of resources online that hundreds of thousands of developers have used to prepare for interviews. I have many free YouTube videos. I also have premium products that I either own or have been a part of creating. For example, something like AlgoExpert, which has helped over 200,000 developers prepare. And then I currently run a one-on-one mentorship program where I'm working with about 150 to 200 developers at the moment. Again, doing mock interviews with them, helping them prepare for technical interviews. So I have a lot of context, have actually worked with many people, and I know exactly what works, what doesn't work, and I've seen people get offers for 200, 300, 400, 500K from these big tech companies by getting good at interviewing. And that's actually where I want to start. Interviewing, especially for tech roles, is objectively very hard and very annoying because the things that you learn to interview are not the things that you actually do on the job. That said, it is the highest leverage thing that you can possibly get good at if you are a software developer. Your interview performance directly ties to your compensation, which directly ties to the quality of life and the type of companies that you can work at, and simply putting your head down and spending 1, 2, 3 months getting good at interviewing will change your life. Seriously. You can go from making $90K per year at a decent job where the interview process wasn't that difficult to making $250K with the exact same skill set purely because you got good at interviewing. So I just want to knock that into your head. As much as it's annoying, you kind of just have to play the game. And all the developers that I know that make a lot of money, we're talking multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, realized this and focused all of their attention to the highest leverage thing, which is getting good at passing technical interviews. So with all of that said, let's get into it and let me explain to you exactly how to prepare, the resources that you can use, and exactly what you need to do in the shortest amount of time to be able to pass these types of interviews. So when it comes to technical interviews, I like to break it down into 3 distinct categories. We have planning, preparing, and then passing. These are the 3 things you need to do if you want to pass a technical interview and get an offer. Now let's start really quickly in the planning phase. The first thing you have to do before you can start preparing for interviews is understand what you're actually up against. You need to do a little bit of research and determine for your specific industry, front end, back end, DevOps, ML, whatever, what type of interviews can you actually expect. Now, I would highly recommend doing some research here, picking the target companies that you want to work at, looking at the experiences of people that have interviewed there, reading Glassdoor, reading Reddit, watching YouTube videos, and gathering as much information as you can so you have the full context before you dive into a bunch of preparation. Now, for most of you, when you do this, you'll realize that you probably are going to have to pass a LeetCode style technical interview. I would say about 80% of the developers I work with eventually get one of these types of interviews, maybe not at every company, but at least at a few of the ones that they're applying to, which means that you do have to spend a significant amount of time preparing for that specific type of interview and a little bit of time on the other things like the behavioral, system design, etc., which I will also cover in this video. Now, once you've done a little bit of planning and kind of researching and you know, okay, this is what I'm up against, it's time to start preparing. Now, that involves doing questions, doing mock interviews, understanding the approach and the system to being able to pass interviews, and essentially doing enough volume that you get confident with things like pattern recognition, which we'll dive into later. And then lastly, of course, we have the pass phase. This means you have to show up on the day and you have to execute. That's all it is. You have to not freeze up, you have to not be nervous, and you have to pass the real, in many cases, in-person or online interview by using the skills that you've prepared with. So with that in mind, let me give you the high-level preparation plan that I recommend to most of the developers that I work with. These are kind of some check boxes that you need to get through, and then I'll share with you concretely exactly how you obtain these skills and how to do the practice in an intelligent way. Again, I have worked with thousands of developers. I have prescribed this to many, many people. I know for a fact that it works. Doesn't mean that it's easy, but overall the plan is relatively simple if you can follow through and put the work in. So first of all, you should have some kind of timeline in mind when you're going to go into this preparation. This isn't something you're going to do for a year. It's not something you're always going to be doing. Usually you're going to do it in a short proximity to when you expect you're going to receive interviews. Now, what I'm going to recommend to you is very doable in 2 to 3 months. This is the amount of time that I find most people take to get prepared for interviews if they follow the system I'm going to break down. Now, the first thing that you need to do is you need to master the data structures and algorithms foundations. That means understanding time complexity analysis and knowing all of the core data structures like linked lists, trees, binary search trees, heaps, etc., right? You need to know that. Now, once you learn that, which you should already kind of know and just be doing a refresher at this point, you need to do at least 75 to 100 high quality questions. And the high quality questions is the important part. This is a LeetCode style problem, a DSA style problem, right? We're going to talk about that in a minute. 75 to 100, while it's not a massive amount, is enough to master the pattern recognition, which is what you need to pass these interviews, okay? So keep that in mind. 75 to 100 should be your minimum target. Next, assessments. You need to do online assessments and put yourself in high pressure environments where you have some kind of time constraint and you're answering questions under some kind of pressure. I then suggest doing as many mock interviews as possible with a minimum of 4. From what I've found with most students is by the time they get to the 4th mock interview, they really understand the system, they're treating it a lot more seriously, and they're performing like they will in the real interview. The first 1 or 2 mock interviews is usually you practicing and learning. The 3rd one, usually you do a lot better. And the 4th one, you try to treat it like a legitimate real interview, and that really gets you well prepared. And then last thing, you need to practice like you play. So when you start getting near the end of the questions, it's really important the way you do the problem as opposed to just the volume of problems. And then, of course, we have system design, practical preparation, but that's not as much as what I want to focus on here because that's a lot easier to do than this DSA style problem, which a lot of you kind of associate technical interviews with. So that is kind of my high level preparation plan, the things that you need to do. Now, let me go onto the computer and show you the exact resource that I would recommend you use to do this, why, and exactly how you can effectively learn all of these things. Now, the resource that I personally recommend to learn all of the things that I've just gone over and that I used myself when I passed my Microsoft and Shopify interviews is AlgoExpert. Now, full disclosure, this is a paid platform. This is not free, and there's a reason for that because it's significantly higher quality than some of the other free resources that you'll see online. Now, you can use anything that you want. I don't really care if you buy this platform, but this is personally what I stand behind. And I've also been a member of the AlgoExpert team many times, helped them build the product and the platform. And some of the video explanations you see on here come directly from me. Anyways, I'm being transparent with you. I know a lot of you are just going to say, oh, you built it, so it's completely biased. But this is what I used before they paid me any money to pass my coding interviews. And I liked it so much that I literally approached them, had them hire me so I could work on the platform. And I built a bunch of resources, as you will see. Anyways, why do I recommend AlgoExpert? Well, because it covers all of the things that I talked about and doesn't just give you the questions. If you go here and you go to AlgoExpert like this, they have 200 curated coding interview questions. Curated is the important part, as well as various other resources like data structures and algorithms crash course, coding interview assessment, coding mock interviews, right? Coding interview tips, and a bunch of other stuff for different types of interviews like systems expert, front-end expert, ML expert, right? So you can learn all of those other concepts as well. And if you are interested in buying it, you'll see that right now they currently have a large sale going on where you get all of the products for $119. Now you can also try out portions of the platform for free, but let me go through exactly how I would use this tool. And even if you don't use this tool, it's still going to be good guidance on how do you select the problems? How do you practice the problems? What do you do first? What order should you go in? I'm going to cover all of that. Let's get into it. So first things first, data structures and algorithms. This is the first thing that you need to be really comfortable with. You don't need to be an expert. You don't need to memorize everything, but you need to overall understand the core data structures, the core algorithms like searching algorithms, for example, and more importantly, the time complexity of the various operations. Now here, AlgoExpert has the only ones that you need to know. So for example, complexity analysis, right? Memory, big O notation, logarithms, arrays, linked lists, hash tables, stacks and queues, strings, graphs, and trees. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know any other data structures unless you're going for some super advanced senior level interview. And even still, in most cases, you don't need to know more. These are the ones that you need to learn. Start with this and get the theory down. It's annoying, but it's an absolute fundamental to be able to understand how some of these problems are kind of created and how you can solve them. Again, focusing on the efficiency and the time complexity of the operations associated with these data structures. What I mean by that is the operations like adding, removing, searching, deleting, and creation as well. These are kind of the core operations that you always need to use in these problem-solving exercises, and by knowing the time complexity of different data structures, you know which data structure to pick based on which of those operations you need to optimize for. Okay, now next thing after that is to understand the system to interview. Before you jump into a bunch of questions and you start actually doing practice and, reversing a linked list, you need to understand what you're actually going to be up against in an interview and how you're expected to answer the problem. When you go into an interview, there's kind of just a formula that you follow, right? You start by asking clarifying questions. You break down the problem. You come up with an algorithm. You write the algorithm. You step through the time complexity, right? There's this formula, this structure that you need to follow. You need to learn that, and you can learn that from these 5 videos right here on AlgoExpert called Coding Interview Tips. You also can just look them up on YouTube, Google, whatever. You'll find a bunch of people. This is not some hidden sauce. Many people know about this, but you need to know it so you understand how to practice. Now, once you've done those 2 things, it's time to do the more difficult stuff, which is the coding interview questions. Now, the important part here is that you don't just randomly pick problems and do this blind. You're going to see a lot of people online that say they did like 500 LeetCode problems and they still can't pass a coding interview. The reason for that is they have no structure or system to the questions that they're doing. And that's one of the reasons that while those resources exist and they're free, a lot of times they're not effective because the quality of the problems is not that great and you're doing a lot of work that doesn't really yield you any result. Or you're answering a question, but you have no idea the underlying concepts behind that. So the way that I recommend approaching the interview prep is to go category by category. You do one category up to usually medium level, you move to the next, and you continue through that so you build something called pattern recognition, where you're able to look at a problem, categorize it into a pattern, and know roughly how to go about solving it without having to memorize the problems. So personally, what I would suggest by doing is grouping the problems by category and tackling, like I said, one category at a time. So you start with the array category. Now, you don't do all 33 questions here because doing like very difficult problems in a lot of cases doesn't make sense, especially if you're at like an intern level or a mid level, right? Or if you're a junior. So what I suggest is you do all of the easy and medium problems within one category. You knock those out, you get super comfortable with that category, and then once you feel comfortable, you move on to the next one. So you start with arrays, you go to binary trees, right? Binary search trees, dynamic programming, and you go through one category at a time and you do those problems. Some are larger than others, and that should also indicate to you that for arrays, for example, that has 33 problems, there's a reason for that because array problems are very, very common. So they're giving you more practice in the categories that are more likely to come up. Whereas if you look at something like heaps, that's not as common as a problem for you to get. Or famous algorithms, for example. Do you need to know the A-star algorithm? Probably not. It's here on AlgoExpert, and it's also actually taught by me. But the thing is, right, like that's how it's curated on this platform where the questions and the quantity of them actually directly correlates to how likely they are to appear in the interview. So that's how I would select the questions. Again, you're going to do approximately like kind of half of them up to the medium in each category. Then once you've finished all of the categories, you revisit each category and sporadically pick a few of the problems increasing in difficulty because now you're a lot more comfortable, and that will allow you to get those revisions in, right? Kind of review some of that information, especially when you're going into the interview, but you've already built the base. Now let's talk about the most important part, which is actually doing the questions. So let me just pick a random question here. Let me pick one that I did, reconstruct binary search tree. So when you do the problems, if you're an AlgoExpert, you're going to see a UI that looks something like this. Now, this is kind of agnostic of where you're working, but I'll show you some of the tools here that are useful. So this is kind of your live, coding editor environment. Now, it's very important that you treat practicing for these problems like you're in a real interview, which means you don't just immediately jump in and start trying to solve the problem. You follow the process that we've learned before, which is we need to ask clarifying questions. You literally need to do that in the practice. You don't forget to do that in the real thing. You need to come up with a plan and break down the problem. You can see, like, I literally have a notepad beside me, and when I'm doing questions, I write on my notepad like I would write on a whiteboard to explain, okay, this is my algorithm, this is how I'm going to solve it, blah, blah, blah. Then, and only then, do you start coding out the solution. Now, you always start with the naive approach, which is the worst time complexity solution, and then you work your way up to the more complex solutions, which are better time complexity. Now, you can do those directly inside of here. If you get stuck, you can use the hints on the platform. Try to just use one hint at a time like you would in a real interview. And very importantly, once you get through the first few problems and you start to build a little bit of confidence, start timing yourself. For the first problems, don't worry about it because it is going to take you longer, but you should be able to solve these problems in 45 minutes. That's usually what you're given in the interview. And obviously, if you could do it better than that or do it sooner than that, better. And then, of course, change your language to whatever language you write in. They have 9, I think, on the platform. Python is the most common and what I would recommend. But if you are doing a front-end interview, of course, you're probably going to do it in JavaScript, right? So change it over to that. Okay, let me change back to Python. So that's how you should approach the problems. And then only once you've actually written all of the code, do you submit the code and see if it passed the test cases. Now, here's the important thing. A lot of times when you're doing these problems, you're going to fail. Like, you're not going to be able to answer them. It's going to be super tricky. You're not going to know the thing. And that's why I personally recommend AlgoExpert. Not only do they have the solutions here, as well as community solutions and official solutions that you can look at that are vetted and that are actually correct, because a lot of time on other platforms, they're not, but there are detailed video explanations for every single problem that explain in depth, not just the solution, but the thought process and the intuition to derive that solution. Think about that. We're not just giving the solution, we're explaining this is how, if you didn't know the solution, you would come up with it and the way you should think through the problem. That's the missing piece from most of the free platforms out there. And that is personally why when I did my practice, right, and I was preparing for my Microsoft interviews, I used this platform because the video explanations were invaluable. I needed them to build that intuition where I only needed to do like 80, 90 problems, not 200 problems, 400 problems, 1,000 problems, because I built the pattern recognition and the intuition. So for each question, they have a conceptual overview as well as a code walkthrough. In this case, you can see this one is taught by me. If you don't like my teaching style, Clement also teaches questions. There's someone named Connor who does questions on here as well. And it goes through, again, like exactly how this works. So make sure you reference the video solutions, and the more of them that you get through, the more confidence you're going to build. And then you'll be able to start answering a lot of questions on your own, where you can skim through the videos and you don't need to rely on them for you to be able to come up with the answer. So if you're failing the problems, refer to the video solution, watch through it, and then attempt the problem again, right? Without just copying directly the code, move on to the next problem, and again, slowly try to make yourself more and more independent. There's a lot of other features in this platform. I'm not going to go through everything. It's like data structure, visualizer, whatever. But generally speaking, once you get a little bit more confidence, practice like you play, and use the resources that are here because they're there for a reason. Now, once you get to a point where you've done, I would say, at least 50 questions, and ideally even a little bit more, I would highly suggest that you do coding assessments and mock interviews. And this is where you're really going to get more of an objective assessment of where you actually stand, because doing the questions on the platform is a lot different than when you actually do it in front of someone live. So first thing that AlgoExpert has is coding interview assessments. So I would suggest going through all 4 of the assessments that AlgoExpert has here. You can see I tried one of them a while ago and just didn't get through the entire thing. And these kind of simulate what like a real interview loop would be like, where you're going to solve questions for 3 hours. I mean, when I did my Microsoft interview, even for an intern level, I had 3 interviews, all an hour each, back to back to back with no break. So you're going to have to get used to doing that kind of work and, you know, that kind of mental taxing load that you have to do. So I would suggest doing the assessments first, which you can do kind of self-paced on your own, and then using the platform to book mock interviews. So if you go here, where is it? We have mock coding interviews. You can request peer-to-peer mock interviews on the platform. These are free. You don't need to pay for this. And then if you want to go a step further, I would actually do some in-person, like live with another person, where you have a whiteboard, you have your friend, even if they're not technical, ask you the question, and you go through and you whiteboard it out and you simulate as close to the real thing what a real interview would be like. Now, I know at this point, you know, it sounds like a lot. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. But remember, interview performance directly correlates, honestly, to the quality of your life and especially your compensation. If you get really good at this, it will change your life. You will pretty much double your salary, especially if you're not already working at a big tech company, and you can just completely change the trajectory of your career because it's so important, and it's one of those things that is measured objectively. How well do you perform an interview? That's directly under your control, and just putting your head down for 2 or 3 months will change your life, which is why I'm giving you the exact recipe on how to do this. Again, not claiming that it's easy to do so. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now, with that in mind, you may, if you're going for like a mid or senior level interview, get systems design questions. If that's the case, use SystemsExpert. I'm not going to go through the whole curriculum, but essentially they have the system context index, which is what you should start with. Just kind of go in the order that they have here. Do the system design fundamentals, right? So go through all of that. And then let me go here, do the system designs questions, do the system design quiz, right? Get through all of that. Again, this is objectively easier than doing the questions. It is a harder topic, but it's easier to practice and get better at, especially using a resource like this. And then if you're doing a front-end interview, they have front-end expert. You're doing an ML expert, use ML expert. Doing infrastructure, iOS, blockchain, right? All of that is here, and it's all currently in that very low price. You can buy all of this at one time. It's bundled together, and then you can combine these different things based on the type of interview you're going to get into. Now, 80% of the work is going to be done in this core AlgoExpert product, or really just the DSA style kind of interview prep. The rest is so that if you have a niche specific interview, which sometimes will happen, but is a bit more rare, you have that understanding as well. So I think with that said, I'm going to wrap up the video here. I know this was long, but I just wanted to share with you what you need to do, how to do it, and give you kind of that complete recipe to how to pass these interviews. What I'm saying here is not just me guessing. This is exactly what I've done with literally 10,000 plus students. AlgoExpert has 200,000 plus customers for a reason that have landed jobs at Google, Amazon, Facebook, Meta, you name it, because this works. It is hard. It's not easy. It's not for people that aren't going to put in the work and put in the volume. But if you can commit a few hours a day to getting good at this skill and using these kind of resources, I promise it will change your life. Anyways, with that said, guys, that's all I have for you. If you enjoyed, make sure you like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.